I'm Claire Beckman, and I'm the chairperson of the 2021 Virtual Shell Show, brought to you by the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club. I'd especially like to thank the committee that made this possible. In addition to myself, we have Mary Burton, Joyce Mathis, Phyllis Sharp, Joe Timko, Diane Thomas, and huge thanks to Connie Jump, who did most of the editing, all of the graphics, and we couldn't have done this without her. Thousands of folks made this happen. In addition to our over 50 sponsors who shelled out over 22,000 clams, we have videographers, still photo submitters, Shell Club members. We have subscribers to our website, our YouTube channel, people who follow us on Instagram and Facebook. We have loads of folks who have helped to make this possible, who even are in the videos. So we thank all of you and hope you enjoy this show. I am back as your cephalopod of ceremonies today, and I have some important housekeeping things to share with you. Tentacle 1. You will not be able to pause the show and rejoin where you left off during the next 2 days, but you will be able to watch the show in its entirety on our website starting on Monday. That will be sanibelshellclub.com, and we hope you'll stay with us the next 2 days. Tentacle 2. The schedule for both days is up on our website at sanibelshellclub.com. Tentacle 3. And this is very important because 3 is how many hearts an octopus has. But Tentacle 3 is there are 3 ways in which you may win one of our door prizes we will be awarding every single half hour during this show. Number 1, you may comment under the video on YouTube in the chat section. Number 2, you may make a comment via email at info@sanibelshellclub.com. And number 3, you may go to our website at sanibelshellclub.com and make a comment. You need to do this every half hour or you will not be celebrating one of our great door prizes. Tentacle number 4, use of any part of this broadcast without the written permission of the Sanibel Shell Club is prohibited. So drop us a line and we'd love to allow you to use this over and over again. Tentacle number 5, very important. You will be voting on the People's Choice Award for the best photographs submitted from hundreds in the show. You will get a chance to vote on 1 out of 7. All 7 finalists have been selected. The 7 finalists are the winners in each of the 7 categories. There will be a time during the show where you will be selecting the People's Choice Award. And again, there are 3 ways to select the People's Choice Award. Comment on YouTube, email us at info@sanibelshellclub.com, or complete the form on our website for the photo contest by going to sanibelshellclub.com. Tentacle 6. The Sanibel Shell Show will be back at the Community House next year in March of 2022 and be its wonderful, usual, judged competitive show. But this year, we have no t-shirt sales, no book sales, no shell sales, no gate admission. But we know you're having a good time, so we would love it if you would go to our website at sanibelshellclub.com. So hit the button that says donate, and all of the proceeds from that will be used for our grant program. Thank you. Tentacle 7. This is very important. We are amateurs. We did not pay anyone to put together these videos, to write them, to direct them, to edit them, or even to put this show on today. We are volunteer amateurs. So we think it's going to go very well. But if there's an electrical storm in Indiana or something blows up in Colorado, we could have a problem, Houston. So make sure if we have a problem, you go to our website on Monday where you will be able to see the show in its entirety. And last but not least, Tentacle number 8. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate your being here. Let's let the celebration of all things mollusk begin.
Welcome to the Sanibel Shell Festival, a collaboration between two independent groups, the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club and the Sanibel Community Association. The Sanibel Shell Club sponsors the Shell Show inside the Community House, and the Sanibel Community Association sponsors the outdoor activities. The Shell Festival is held the first Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of March at the Sanibel Community House. I'm Tom Ansley, a member of the Sanibel Shell Club, and it's my pleasure to tell you here about the Sanibel Shell Show. The Shell Club has an educational mission, and over 50 years ago, it assumed the responsibility for the annual Shell Show. The proceeds from the competitive Shell Show support the club's grants program. The shell crafters and the shelling bees work throughout the year preparing for the Shell Festival. The income from the shell art and the shell sales supports the community house. The word seashells is synonymous with Sanibel, and shell enthusiasts come from around the world to compete in the Sanibel Shell Show. It is the longest running and most prestigious competitive shell show in the country. Competitors come from across the United States and Canada and far away as India, Europe, New Zealand, Japan, and the Caribbean. Winning an award at this show means you have reached the pinnacle. In 2020, there were 295 exhibits in the Shell Show. Competitors came from 60 cities in 23 different states and 4 countries. What can you expect to see at the Shell Show? Shells, of course, but not only those you might find on Sanibel's beaches, but shells from around the world. These shells can be seen in fascinating scientific exhibits and exquisite works of art, such as floral bouquets and the ever-popular Sailor's Valentines. It takes almost a year to plan a shell show. Things shift into high gear when the entry forms start to come in. Every year, Shell Club members fill 3,000 small gift bags with Sanibel shells. These are given to people who make a voluntary donation to see the show. All the profits from the Shell Show are given out in the form of education and research grants. 3 days before the show opens, the rooms are set up. The tables must be absolutely level. Then the space for each exhibit must be measured accurately. Over 690 linear feet of exhibit space needs to be prepared. The stage in the scientific exhibit hall is set up with shell-related games and a mini theater where people can watch interesting videos of live mollusks. The following day, the exhibitors arrive. In the scientific hall, single shell exhibits are placed in the front rows and larger exhibits are placed behind them. Some exhibits are 40 feet in length. In the artistic hall, both the tables and walls are used to display the exhibits. Judging is done the following day. The identities of the exhibitors are hidden until after the judges reach their decisions. Everything is ready for opening day. Everyone is eager to see the new exhibits because they seem to get better and better every year. The scientific exhibit hall is the first room you enter when you go into the shell show. Shell collectors can simply enter their favorite shell, or they can create an exhibit that contains multiple shells. There are 27 different classes of competition. The long white strips mark the beginning and end of each class. Cards next to the strip tell what is in the class. It also tells you whether an exhibitor found the shells themselves or if they have purchased them. Self-collected means that they found the shells themselves. Any source means that they may have purchased the shell, received it as a gift, or they could have found it. Self-collected shells are given a higher score than shells from any source, if both are of equal value. Each shell must have an identification card with the scientific name on the first line, as well as the name of the person who first named the shell and described the species. The year that you see is when the new species was described, not when the shell was found. Now that you have an introduction to the shell show, let's look at some exhibits. There are exhibits of large shells and exhibits of shells so small that you have to use a magnifying glass to see them well. There are exhibits that contain only one shell, and there are exhibits that might contain hundreds of shells. Exhibits might be strictly scientific in detail, or they might combine science with a bit of art. There is a class especially for fossils, and there is a class for other sea life, such as urchins. What do the judges look for when they're judging? In multiple shell exhibits like this, aesthetics, the quality of the shells, the accuracy of the labels and the text, and the exhibit's educational value are all equally important. This award-winning exhibit focuses on venom cone snails and their harpoon-like teeth that they shoot into their prey. The venom from the geography cone can easily kill an adult. Single shell specimen judging is based on two things: the quality of the shell and how it is displayed. The quality of the specimen is important, but the rarity of the shell may also be considered. A rare shell will be given more points than a common shell. This exhibit took lots of imagination. It is for shells that are abnormal. This mollusk general hospital is filled with misshapen shells. When the mollusk's mantle, that is the organ that is responsible for building the mollusk shell, is injured, it can result in abnormal shell growth. This is an extensive collection of what some refer to as freak shells. The accompanying backboards explain how shells grow and regenerate. Note that each shell has the required identification card. Just as there is a vast variety of scientific shell exhibits, there is a vast difference in the age of our exhibitors. Shell Club member Evelyn Spencer was 98 years old when she was interviewed by Bill Geist for CBS Sunday Morning in 2013. She volunteered every day at the Shell Show and also won 2 blue ribbons. In 2019, Nicholas Baker and his sister Olivia won their first ribbons in the Young Scientist class for kindergartners to 6th graders. Their brother Dominic won a blue ribbon in the 7th through 12th grade class and the Best Young Scientist Award for his exhibit.
Leaving the scientific world of shells, prepare to be amazed by the beauty and creative world of shell art. I'm Mary Burton, Chair of the Artistic Division. Exhibits range from the simplicity of a single stem of flowers to beautiful floral arrangements. You will see mirrors adorned with shells, outstanding needlecraft, and everyone's favorite, the intricate and detailed sailor's valentines. All the exhibits were created using imagination, shells, marine life, patience, and skill. This large octopus measures 42 inches by 40 inches and is 24 inches tall. It consists of 10,000 shells that were collected by the exhibitor and weighs 82 pounds. Artistic features a hobbyist division and a professional division with a combined total of 61 classes. The only difference between the two divisions is the professional exhibitors sell their art. There are 2 young artist classes. They are based on their grade level in school, kindergarten through 5th grade, and 6th grade through high school. The diversity of exhibits range from elegant and detailed works of art to fun and whimsical presentations. Every class has a criteria that the exhibit must adhere to in order to avoid disqualification by the judges. The criteria of this particular class stipulates that sea life with or without shells are to be used. The artist chose sea life only and used dyed gar and fish scales as well as dyed and natural sea urchin parts to create the flowers. What makes a winner? Artistic exhibits are judged on the quality of craftsmanship, the quality and choice of the materials, the arrangement, its beauty, and the originality of the creation. Excessive glue, glue strings, broken shells, dust, and other flaws can make the difference between receiving a ribbon or none at all. Let's take a look at some of these winning exhibits. Sculpted urchins and urchin spines were primarily used in this modern sailor's valentine. The figure of Marie Antoinette was sculpted and painted by the exhibitor. He created her wig from mohair, and her dress is made entirely from shells. Hand-carved pieces of capiz shell with tiny drilled holes mimicking lace adorns the end of each sleeve. Her left hand holds a fan fashioned from carved capiz shell. All the pieces of this beautiful set of jewelry were created using pink chitons, trivia shells, and cultured pearls. This double valentine received 2 major awards for its meticulous craftsmanship and beautiful design. This exhibit received many comments. These bleeding heart blooms are made from dyed heart cockle shells and gar scales. Colorful shell flowers surround the beautiful painting of a mermaid. Notice the intricate shell patterns outside the floral ring. Only one species of shell was used to make the base of this lamp. Imagination has no limits in shell art. A lattice border of sea urchin spines surrounds a swan crafted by the exhibitor from abalone mother of pearl. This ostrich egg is covered with tiny shells and has an urchin at its base. The butterflies in this valentine are hand-carved from mother of pearl found in abalone shells. What else can you do while you're at the shell show? Go up on the stage and rest your feet while you watch a video about live mollusks. While you are there, play one of the shell games. They're fun for adults and children. Do you need help identifying a shell? Bring it to the shell show and talk to one of our experts. Talk to local authors about their latest book and get an autographed copy. Check out the shell sales table for beautiful shells and more. Children get to choose a nice shell after they complete the scavenger hunt. Learn more about the Sanibel Shell Club at our club table. Buy a t-shirt at our tent right outside the door. Using your cell phone, we will take a picture of you in a bikini. Looks real, doesn't it? Guys do it too. Let's look outside at what's going on the grounds of the community house. Throughout the year, people collect shells and donate them to the Sanibel Community Association. Volunteers, known as the shelling bees, meet on a weekly basis to sort the shells and get them ready for sale during the festival. You can buy them for as little as 25 cents. Almost every Monday, shell crafters meet at the community house to create beautiful floral arrangements made from shells. This is a real treasure chest of shells. Crafters even make cute little shell animals like these elephants and black cats. If you are curious about how to make shell flowers, these crafters are happy to show you how to do it. The money raised by the outdoor activities supports the community house. If you have never seen a live mollusk, now is your chance. During the Shell Festival, aquariums in this building come alive with mollusks. When they are in the 6th grade, Sanibel School students study mollusks and the shells they create. They get the chance to share their knowledge with the public during the Shell Festival. At the end of the festival, the mollusks are returned to their natural habitat. We hope you've enjoyed this overview of the Sanibel Shell Festival.
All the profits from the Shell Show are given out in the form of education and research grants.
Over $350,000 in grants have been awarded from 1997 to 2020. We look forward to seeing you at the next Sanibel Shell Festival.
Hi, I'm Mike Parsons, Director of the Vester Field Station at Florida Gulf Coast University. Here we are out on the water at the field station off of Bonita Beach Road. And today I'm going to talk to you about our Rink to Reef program. Our Rink to Reef program was actually started by our FGCU hockey team, where they were trying to find ways to repurpose broken hockey sticks instead of simply throwing them away in the landfill. So they came up with this oyster habitat idea, which we now call Rink to Reef. The idea is that these habitats will recruit oysters, and the oysters will settle on them, and we can get tens or hundreds of oysters that settle on these units. Each adult oyster can filter tens of liters of water, so if you have hundreds of oysters on each unit, we're talking about thousands of liters of water that can be filtered every single day. The oysters filter out algae and particles from the water. That helps to clean the water. It helps to make the water clearer, which is good for seagrass beds and is good for us who want to look at nice clean water. So it's a good program all around. Oyster reefs also bring in things like barnacles and larval fishes and other small fishes, as well as shrimps and crabs. So these Rink to Reef units create basically a little ecosystem for other organisms as well. They give our students great opportunities to do hands-on science, to interact with the community. The community gets an opportunity to put these Rink to Reef habitats out underneath their docks, which helps to clean up the water and create oyster habitat. So it's a win-win all around, where we can do our part to try to clean our waters.
First of all, I would like to thank the Sanibel Shell Club for their interest and generous support for our research at the water school in Florida Gulf Coast University. Their support means a lot to us. This funding was really helpful in supporting undergraduate students during the hard time created by COVID-19 pandemic. And in some cases, it was the only source of income for some of the students. The support from Shell Club, along with other funding sources, have been used to study radium and nutrients in various water samples from the Southwest Florida region. Radium is a naturally occurring radioactive metal, and it is found in different forms in nature. We call these different forms of radium as radium isotopes. The combination of radium isotopes is unique for a specific source of water, meaning the groundwater has different types and amounts of radium isotopes compared to river and seawater. As different water sources have different signatures of these radium isotopes, they have been used as a tracer for source of water and also to track associated nutrients in a specific body of water. Tracers can help us track things like nutrients or pollutants back to their source. It is like retracing the steps from a crime scene. It helps us determine where the water and nutrients are coming from. This is why our main aim of this study is to use radium as a tracer for nutrients in various Southwest Florida water bodies, because as we all know that nutrients are major environmental problem in this area. Despite COVID-19 pandemic directly affecting our teaching and research activities, we were able to go out and collect water samples from different locations for radium and nutrients analysis. While we are still working on some of the sample analysis, once we have all the results ready, it will be very helpful for us to determine potential source of nutrients in this region. The funding from the Shell Club was used to purchase supplies and to partially support 4 students working in my lab. Two of them recently graduated, and other 2 are currently working on this project. The students currently working on this project, James and Jack, are very excited to share their work to the Shell Club. Again, I would like to thank the Shell Club for their interest and support. And now let's see some of the work that we have been doing for this project.
This is the pump system we use to help collect the radium samples, and I'll be momentarily dipping this in the water to help collect the water we need to collect the radium.
And then, nope. There we go, all right. So, what we do is, as that water's flowing up this pipe, it flows into this filter over here, just like your household filter. This one gets the majority of the gunk out of the water before we put it in the super expensive instrument. As this gets filtered through these manganese fibers over here, this is actually what gets put in the instrument, so we want as little contamination as possible. We want just straight radium.
And we use manganese fibers because they act like a magnet to attract radium, so it collects any radium that was present in the water.
What we do is we take this, after this is filled up, screw it on tight, and then we hang it over the side. Hang it over the side anywhere really, doesn't matter, as long as that gravity can pull the water down through these fibers. And as this water flows past these fibers, the manganese fibers actually, as he was saying, pull that radium in real tight and filter it out of the water.
Right now we've taken our manganese fiber from the pump system, it's all dried out. I'm going to stick it in this tube and attach it to the radix system.
So the way the radix works is, after this gets all hooked up, we turn on a helium gas tank. And that helium gas is a carrier gas. It carries the radium all throughout this system. We got our detectors at the top on the left and the right, and they detect 2 of the isotopes of radium, 219 and 220. We leave this for about 4 hours, just circulating constantly, detects every time it breaks down. And then that's what helps give us one ratio that we use to track these water sources. So once we are done running these fibers on the other radix machine, we actually bring them down here to work with the germanium detector. And I pass them off to Zach.
And then we take the manganese fiber, we put it in this crucible here, we place it in hot oven. And then once it's finished, we take it out of the hot oven. This is what the manganese fiber looks like when it's out of the oven. And I take the manganese fiber and I grind it using this, It takes several attempts, and once it's done, this is the final product of what it looks like after I'm done grinding, and now it's ready to be put in the geranium detector.
So we took that initially large volume of fibers and we ground them all the way down to this nice powder, and we put them in here, the germanium detector. We closed this giant lead shield, and we actually let this run from anywhere from 1 to 4 days. The radioactivity is so low in it that we have to let it run for that long amount of time. It's no danger to us or anyone else. But using the numbers that we get from this, we can actually track the water sources. As Puspa was talking about earlier, you have different isotopes of radium, and we can look at those different isotopes using this. And as we find where they're coming from, we can look at other sources of water and say, hey, our ratio matches that ratio, so this water must have come from there. And in this water are nutrients and toxins and a slew of other things that we're looking at.
I'm Greg Tolley, Executive Director of the Water School at Florida Gulf Coast University. You know, when I think of water, I think of clean drinking water for human health and well-being. I think of water for economic development and social development and prosperity. I think of water for healthy ecosystems that bring people to Southwest Florida in the first place. Our lovely beaches, our mangrove areas, our seagrasses, fishing, birding. These are all things that are important for us here in Southwest Florida. But water isn't always our friend. Floods, droughts, sea level rise, hurricanes, these all impact our areas in negative ways as well. So it's important to think of all these connections of water as part of a system, part of a larger system. And when we get the water wrong, the entire system can collapse. So what the Water School is trying to do is make sure that we get the water right. And we do this by applying a more holistic approach to looking at our water problems. We have faculty from over 4 different colleges and 16 different departments in the Water School, colleges including engineering, business, health and human services, and the College of Arts and Sciences. And we're trying to come up with solutions that are more sustainable, solutions that look far into the future to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences, solutions that look beyond local boundaries to make sure that what we do here in Southwest Florida isn't impacting our neighbors to the north or the south or the east. Our students here at Florida Gulf Coast University are looking at sea level rise, climate change, how to restore important ecosystems, including the Florida Everglades and other wetland areas, for example, the importance of shorebirds in terms of our local ecosystems and how our development and our behavior can actually impact those shorebirds. So when I think of water as the economy of Southwest Florida, as the driver of Southwest Florida. And so when you give to Florida Gulf Coast University, you're helping to fuel that. We want to thank you for your support of Florida Gulf Coast University. I always say that our number 1 responsibility is to our students, but our number 2 responsibility is to our community. We feel very, very embedded in the community and a part of you, and we want you to feel that the Water School is your water school as well.
Hi, I'm Rachel from Tampa, Florida. I've entered the Shell Show every year since 2012, and I'm excited to share this fun project with you all. I'm going to show you how to transform a vintage printer tray into a magical work of art with shells and sea life. If you're new to shell art, maybe you're not ready to jump headfirst into a sailor's valentine or shell bouquet, this is the perfect starter project where you can develop your shell art skills and in the end still wind up with something equally as beautiful as some more difficult projects. Let's get started. For this project, here are the materials you're gonna need. Of course, you're gonna need the printer tray, and you could search for these on eBay, at garage sales, Facebook Marketplace, and finding them is kind of half the fun since they are vintage. You're also gonna need, I would say, about 2 cans of spray paint. I use the paint and primer in one, but you don't have to. Goggles and a face mask for the spray paint. Some Sawtooth hangers so you can mount the tray on the wall, as well as tacky glue. The printer tray I'm using already had a hanger attached in the middle, but for demonstration I'm adding 2 hangers on each side. Always remember to do this step before adding any shells, and also make sure to add some tacky glue on the nail and under the hanger to assure the hanger is securely fastened to the tray. Always remember to wear safety goggles and a mask while using the spray paint, and always remember to spray paint outdoors. A printer tray will usually require 2 coats of paint and a 3rd touch-up layer. Allow the paint to dry for 24 hours. Of course, painting is not a mandatory step in this project, but I do find that having a clean light color will help the shells and sea life pop when they're added in the subsequent step. Now it's time to fill the tray. I'm using a tacky glue to secure the shells to the tray, but a 527 glue should work as well. Play around with the different slots to find the shells that complement and contrast each other. For me, it's all about color and texture. In this tray, I'm going for all the colors of the rainbow I can find in my collection. Maybe you want to do the same, or maybe you just want to add shells from a single trip you've taken. Remember, there are no rules here. The world is your oyster. The most important thing is to let your creative juices flow and have fun. Also note, you don't have to exclusively add shells. In this tray, I've included a painting of a shell, a miniature shell bouquet in a paper nautilus, a shell-shaped decanter label, and shell-themed stamps, and shell flowers throughout. Let's take a look at our finished product. Thank you so much for watching.
I'm Andrea Renee Schoaf, and I first started having a love for seashells as a small kid. I never really got to travel much, but a few times was lucky enough to go to a place called Ocean Grove, New Jersey. In that time, I got to go to this really small shell shop, and I remembered these shells in a bowl that you could scoop for $1 and put in a bag, and I thought it was like the most special treasure I could have had at that time. I've always had a love for art and painting and drawing and any kind of fine art. Every year in March, there was this seashell show. I saw so many talented artists doing work that I've never seen before with shells. And I thought to myself, I can do this. I've been an artist my whole life, and I love to design anything. And I have a huge shell collection at this point. So I wanted to combine the two. When this all happened, that I started using my shells in my work, I really found the transition pretty easy because I've always loved doing mixed media. It usually takes me just a few days to plan out a piece. I find something I want to start with, and then I really try to think what could make it unusual, that's something that no one else is gonna do. I really like to work with all different kinds of seashells, but the most special ones to me are really sea life, like sea urchins and starfish and coral and crab legs. I think they're unique and really add something to the piece. One of the things I enjoy most about working on my pieces is the whole experience of being able to travel to the specific countries and actually find the shells that I'm using in my pieces. That's a really unique experience that I get to have with each country I go to. I learn about different cultures, and I spend so much time with the local people learning about their island, and then they take me to places that no one's really ever gotten to go to find shells and coral and crabs and sea urchins and all kinds of sea life. So this is my studio in Port Deposit, Maryland, that I've had for a little over a year, and I really love it here. It's on the water, and it's inspiring to work in this studio. I think what I like best about creating seashell art has been just that I'm in my own little world with my shells, designing. I usually do between 4 and 5 pieces in a year. I like to do a mirror, a lamp, and I also definitely like to make at least one piece with animals and some kind of large sculpture. For example, for the bike piece, I saw a bicycle. I always wanted to do a bicycle, and I thought, how can it fit into the show? So for the holiday category, I thought I could put an Easter egg in it and make it like a whimsical piece. I think I'm successful at seashell art because I really try to think outside the box and do something completely unique that no one else is doing. If you're ever thinking about entering the shell show, I would highly recommend you to do it because it's been such a great experience for me. Everyone's really friendly, and I've gotten to meet so many very talented and creative people. I think about the trips that I've been on and just the whole experience of collecting the shells and then using them for something really special for other people to see and enjoy. And most people are very surprised when they see what I can do with seashells. They've never seen anything like that before. So that's been neat to see how people react to my work.
American Conchologist, the title of our quarterly journal, the entirety of the publication from the newsletter through last month's issue has been cataloged and through the end of last year, totally indexed. The index is posted on the COA website, and it runs about 183 pages. We have a commitment from the Biodiversity Heritage Library that we will have every issue of the COA publication, American Conchologist and its predecessors, posted at some point in the future on the internet. A listserv called Conch-L that fields questions. You put in questions, you get answers, discussions, links to other resources of various sorts. This has been operative since 1997 and is a great resource. This is available to anyone, but most everyone is a COA member. The program had its onset in 1985. We've given out 310 grants to about 280 individuals, and a total of $250,000 has been dispersed over that time. Some years ago, we decided to earmark 100% of the proceeds from our oral auction. All those monies are earmarked for the academic grants program.
The conventions for the COA, the Conchologists of America, have occurred from 1972 on. The current year 2020 was the first time where we had to cancel a convention. Anyway, this is a meeting of shell enthusiasts, professional shell dealers, students, academics. We have 3 days worth of meetings, and these folks come from all over the world. And it's interesting because you have a lot of events where you can also buy shells. There are field trips before the convention, 3 days of meetings and with events during that time. And then what happens at the last 2 days is the bourse, which is the sale of shells from, again, dealers from all over the world. Normally we have dealers from China, Australia, sometimes Europe, as well as from all parts of the United States. The premier one is back to Kennedy Space Center, which is NASA's facility, which is diligently working toward the new era of spacecraft, returning astronauts to space. The launch pads are still the same, but they've been totally reconfigured for private launches. Pretty well means that we can't promise, but we can pretty much consider that there will probably be a launch of some sort from the Space Coast during the time of the convention. We're also going to Harbor Branch, which is also coupled with a quick visit to the MCLARTY Treasure Museum, because we are just north of the Treasure Coast, where some of the Spanish galleons were wrecked by hurricanes. We are working with the Sea Turtle Preservation Society, which takes tours out for turtle hatchings. So you can see them. Of course, this will be in the evening. Well, we have the silent auctions, which take place during the 3 days of the meeting. You can get a wide variety of shells there if you're the successful bidder. Our premier event is the oral auction, which occurs the Wednesday night of the convention. All go to money toward supporting COA and our scholarship programs. There are very expensive shells there that you probably will not see other places. Bourse opens up. It's on Saturday from 1 to 8 p.m. and then on Sunday from about 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that is completely open to the public. It is, I believe, one of the largest areas. You'll see more shells there than anywhere else in the United States for sale. One of the things I noticed is that since we haven't had the opportunity to have shell shows or visit with our shelling friends for the past year, wow, I noticed, and shellers are noticing how much they miss not getting together with other shellers. It's almost like the shellers family reunion, where you see people you haven't seen for a year. And so I think the COA conventions are almost like the shellers family reunion for the extended shell family, which goes beyond the United States. So I think people are very interested in getting back to seeing their friends again, not being just confined to their own homes.
Hi, I'm Greg Herbert, and I'm a paleobiology and malacology professor at the University of South Florida. The Sanibel Captiva Shell Club has been a strong supporter of student research at USF. That support has allowed us to do more research on mollusks, but it's also given our students valuable experience. Thank you. The research we do at USF is about the conservation of marine mollusks, especially species of Florida's Gulf Coast. There are many lists of species that live in this area, but some probably haven't been seen alive by humans in more than a century. Some are probably only known from dead shells. So one of the projects my lab is working on is to figure out which kinds of mollusks are out there now and how they're doing. This kind of work is difficult for many reasons. It's hard just to know what's on the seafloor 1,000 feet down and 150 miles offshore anywhere, and we're attempting to do that everywhere in the eastern Gulf of Mexico all at once. So how do we do that? For the last 12 years, we've been fortunate enough to run annual expeditions using research vessels from the Florida Institute of Oceanography. Those vessels can go far offshore for many days, and we have equipment that can grab large samples from the deepest parts of the West Florida shelf and bring it up to the surface. I take up to 10 students on each trip, and we live on board the research vessel for 4 days each trip while we do our work. We usually see amazing sea life like dolphins, porpoise, sharks, and sea turtles that come near the surface. Some of the deep water shells that come up, Cyratus boi. We have a slit shell called Paratrochus amabilis. We have a relative of the famous Junonia. This one's called Scaphella dubia. This is a distant cousin of the tulip snail. This one's called Halprinia temessa. This little murex was named after the conservationist Rachel Carson. This is a beautiful cone called Conus mazai, and a very strange relative of cone snails called Polystyra albida. Those are just some of the examples of the diversity of life that lives in the deeper parts of the Gulf of Mexico. One way we try to reduce the impact that our sampling has on the environment is to take mostly dead shells. We know that shells that still have their original color and luster are relatively young because those features are the first to go when dead shells are left out in nature. We use the dead shells instead of taking more live animals. Here in the lab, we clean shells to get rid of the mud and sand, and that's followed by months of work sorting and identifying each one. We don't waste any shells. We use even broken pieces of shell down to 5 millimeters because that one 5 millimeter piece might be the only record we have for some of the rarest species. Once we're done, we use statistics to predict how many species are actually out there at each site we sampled, and then we visualize those predictions using heat maps, where hotter colors indicate more species. Our goal is to show where the most productive and diverse shell-producing areas are out in the Gulf, so those areas can be considered for conservation. Proper management of shell producers is so important because mollusks actively build reefs and hard bottom that provide food and refuge for thousands of other species. We have another half year of work to do on that map as we check and recheck all of the identifications and statistics that go into it, and we'll have more updates for you all soon. Thanks again.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Rogers, a PhD student at the University of South Florida studying applied anthropology. I'm an archaeologist who uses shells and animal bones from prehistoric sites to investigate the human-environmental relationship over time. And I do this to better understand the impact that humans place on natural resources today and in the past. I hope to pursue a career as a researcher at a university or with the National Park Service after graduation in a few short years. And I want to thank the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club for funding some of my research, which compares the growth of historic and modern oysters from the Tampa Bay estuary. This is important to investigate because growth and size data are used often in oyster management. And the growth and size of modern oysters has already been changed by overharvesting, pollution, and warming temperatures. And scientific collection of these data only goes back to the 1950s. Possibly missing important times of declining health of the species. I use information on oysters from historical records, such as newspapers, archaeological shell middens and mounds from before European arrival, and even fossils, because they offer a better baseline for oyster health. A recent study from my lab, comparing modern and archaeological oysters from Crystal River, showed that oysters today are much smaller in size than they were 1,000 years ago. And the loss of these colossal oysters affects how well modern oysters filter seawater and protect coastlines from storm surge compared to before. My archaeological fieldwork in Tampa Bay has recovered oysters measuring over 7 inches long about 1,000 years ago, and thus far seem to echo the finds at Crystal River. The Sanibel Captiva Shell Club funded part of my research that studies growth rates of oysters. Shells grow like trees, in incremental bands, and the chemistry of each new layer of growth changes with those in water temperature and salinity. In the lab, we can measure these chemical differences, interpret the seasons, track the growth and age of oysters, and we can do this by counting the seasonal water temperature changes that are preserved in the shell. And we do this at a very small scale, like less than a millimeter. And we can incorporate other chemical analyses to look at different elements in relation to storm events and pollution. And just to give you an idea, here I have an oyster from about 1,000 years ago in Tampa Bay from an archaeological site. And you can see how the height of it and also the depth and the size of the hinge. Here I have an oyster from Fort Brooke from the 1800s. So you can see some changes in size, and also the hinge is pretty different. And then we have one from 2020. So very different in terms of size. And these all have cascading effects in the ecosystem. So what we do when we collect oysters is take them back to the lab. We look at the hinge, this part right here. And what we do is cut this in half down the center. And that exposes the bands. They're alternating white and gray. And that's related to summer and winter growth. So we can count those growths to better understand age and measure them to understand growth rate. And then we can incorporate some isotopes and elements to better understand chemistry of the water. So the historic oysters I just showed you were recovered from the Fort Brooke archaeological site, a military outpost from the 1800s located in modern-day downtown Tampa. And this study will help quantify how much oyster growth and size has changed over the last 200 years and extend the current scientific baseline used by scientists in Tampa Bay by over 150 years. So far, I have measured about 1,000 oysters from Fort Brooke and several hundred from earlier archaeological contexts. I've also submitted permits to retrieve the modern comparative samples, and I'm making headway in getting the samples ready for stable isotope analysis and plan to have that done in the near future. The goal is to submit the final work for publication in a peer-reviewed science journal and share the results with environmental land managers and organizations doing oyster restoration in Tampa Bay today. I'm eager to share my results with the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club and want to thank them again for their contribution.
Hi, my name is Morgan Tomlin, and I am an undergraduate student at the University of South Florida, finishing my bachelor's degree in environmental science and policy. Also, I am aiming to go to graduate school for horticultural sciences.
Hi, I'm Nicole Seiden, and I'm a graduate student at the University of South Florida. I'm finishing my master's degree in environmental science and policy, and I'm aiming for a career in oceanography.
We would like to recognize the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club for funding our research on estimating the lifespan of Florida's horse conch, Triplophysis giganteus, and determining their need for conservation.
These animals grow by adding new layers to their shell lip. And as these new layers form, the chemistry of the layers will change in response to changes in temperature. Using the funds from the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club, we were able to sample these layers to recreate the history of temperatures that these animals experienced, and from that, the number of years that they were growing.
We used 2 of the nearest record-sized shells for our analysis, and our results demonstrate that Florida's horse conch is longer lived and slower growing, with a lifespan of about 14 years.
So let me show you some results. Here is what we call a profile. Now this x-axis represents the shell length, or how large that shell is. And each of these peaks is going to represent a summer temperature, whereas each of these valleys, the lower points, are going to represent a winter. Now, as we said, these shells grow by adding new layers right to their shell lip. And as these layers are growing or forming, the chemistry is dependent on the ambient water temperatures. By plotting the temperatures here, we can now count the number of summers or the number of winters. But you see how this lip gets very dark? What's going on here is the growth layers are very narrow, and our method of sampling is not detailed enough to get in between those narrow layers. So we had to adopt another method, and that's called laser scan. And that was just so that we could get a little bit closer and more detailed results. Growth in animals generally follows an S-shaped pattern, where the growth is slow at the very beginning and the very end of life, and generally rapid in between. Horse conchs do this too, but they're unusual in that they grow rapid the majority of their life. It's how they get to be so big. Now that we have the age of these shells and a growth pattern model, we're able to estimate that the age of the maximum size shell at the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum, which is 60 centimeters long, lived for 20 years. Now, we still have a little more work to do, but we've estimated the maximum lifespan of the horse conch to be about 25 years. Once we finalize our results, we're planning to publish them in a peer-reviewed science journal. Thank you so very much for your time and for your support.
Thank you for your time and supporting our research.
name is Wendy the Winter Trap, and I'm reporting to you live from the beautiful beaches of Sanibel Island, Florida. Today, a few of my mollusk friends will join me in helping you understand shelling etiquette through our eyes. We all know you love our beaches and collecting shells, so today we'll walk you through the do's and don'ts of shelling here on Sanibel through our eyes. When you're walking the beach, there are so many clues about what lives here, so it's a great learning experience. See that trail in the sand? Any idea what critter is making that path? What about that live shell strolling along in the water? And what's that looks sort of like a pickle? So many questions, so little time, right? Take your time and try to find some of the answers before you leave. The first thing you need to know once you arrive, there are a few signs around here. The best thing to do, read them carefully. The first and probably the most important one you should see is no live shelling. Pay attention to this one. I mean, really read it. If you don't pay attention to it now, you may have to pay for it later. There are steep fines for taking live mollusks, including live sand dollars, live sea stars, and live sea urchins. Violators are subject to a $500 fine and 60 days in jail for a first offense. Now for the main reason you're here. The shells, the sand, the water, the sunsets. Our beaches stretch for miles. The first rule of being a good sheller is to give everyone space. It's really not polite to get too close to another sheller when they are hunting for seashells. There are plenty of shells for everyone. Don't worry. Can you imagine bending over to pick up the shell of your dreams just to have someone slide in and scoop it up right under your nose? No fun, right? Now you've reached the water's edge and it's low tide. What do we have here? This creature may have 5 or more arms. Yep, you guessed it, sea stars. By the way, I know you've probably been calling it a starfish for most of your life, but the correct way is sea star, because these animals are not fish, right? And it truly does look like a star. You always see them in shallow water, and it's very tempting to pick them up. Did you know these echinoderms can only live a short time out of the water? They have to stay fairly wet because they breathe through their tube feet, which carries oxygen from seawater. They need salt water to breathe. A few minutes out of the water is kind of a death sentence for them. If you want to take a picture of it, please leave it in shallow water so you can have a memory of this special moment and it can still survive. All of us sea creatures thank you. Let's move along. Oh no! I see someone looking at my friend Henrietta. She's a horse conch. Hello, Henrietta.
Hi everyone, Henrietta here. I'm the largest seashell you'll probably see on the beach or in the waters here. I can get up to 2 feet long. That's just over 60 centimeters. Wow, right?
I know you're large and mighty, Henrietta, but I can hear people talking about you, saying you're the biggest horse conch they've ever seen. I'm thinking you might be in trouble. Keep your eyes open, buddy. People are headed your way, and I'm not sure they know there's someone home.
Oh, I see them. Keep your fingers crossed, please. Okay, it's all good. I see a shell ambassador from the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum walking towards me. I know they'll educate the visitors and save the day.
Shellers, please remember, if you are shelling here for Henrietta's sake and the rest of us live mollusks, if we are alive, you can take a peek at us, or even a picture of us. We know finding a live mollusk is a special treat, but we are just asking that you please take care, for our sake. While we're on the subject of living animals and their shells, let's talk about hermit crabs. They're a bit of a mystery to you, right? Hermit crabs don't have a seashell that is part of their body, one that they've made. They find an empty seashell to use for their protection. They have to find one that is just the perfect size for them. Let me introduce you to my hermit crab friend, Herbert. He's going to tell you how that works. Everyone, this is Herbert.
Howdy everyone, Herbert here. So when we need a new shell, we look at our real estate market, just like you would if you wanted to buy a new house. The difference is, we look for empty shells that aren't in use anymore for one reason or another. We won't go into those details. We have to find one that is a perfect fit for our body. Does that make sense? Signing off, Herbert the Hermit Crab. Back to you, Wendy.
So, from one mollusk to another, one mollusk to a human, when you pick up a seashell and it looks empty, please look closer. Hermit crabs are fugitives when it comes to hiding from their predators. They can hide really far inside the shell, so you won't have a clue they're in there. Invisible, one might say. Even the tiniest of shells may have a hermit crab inside. Remember, if you bring them back home with you, it may be a long walk back to the water to rescue them. Let's talk a little about the Florida fighting conch. Did you know it's the visitor's favorite shell to bring home? When you see us on the beach or in the water, if we're empty, please feel free to add us to your shell bag. But if you happen to pick one of us up and we're still alive, please don't just throw us back into the water like a baseball. Us mollusks are delicate and have body parts just like you. We might not survive the impact when we hit the water. Just set us gently where you found us. Let's change the topic for a bit. I'd like to talk to you about my favorite, sea turtles. Did you know sea turtle nesting season officially begins on May 1st and ends on October 31st? Sea turtles are federally protected, and the biggest threats to sea turtles are usually caused by humans. Yes, humans. But the good news is, there are a few things you can do to change that. Turn off or shield all lights that are visible from the beach. Replace the light source with low-watt yellow or amber bulbs, preferably LED. Do not use flashlights, lanterns, or your phone's flash while on the beach at night. Cover the lens of your flashlight with red cellophane to make it less distracting to sea turtles. We don't want to disorient sea turtle hatchlings from making their way to sea. Take all beach chairs and obstacles from the beach back home with you when you leave. We don't want to leave any barriers for the turtles. We know you will all love to build sandcastles and dig holes in the sand looking for shells. One thing to do before you leave the beach, fill in any holes you've made and flatten out the sand. Hatchlings and adult turtles have a hard enough time on land finding a place to lay their eggs, and once hatched, getting back to the water. The sad fact is only an estimated 1 in 1,000 to 10,000 sea turtles will survive to become reproductively active adults. Let's give them a little help and make their journey a little easier. You'll be happy you took the extra time. Now on to another favorite of shellers. Sand dollars. These echinoderms are always a treat to find peeking out at you during a low tide. Remember, you cannot take live ones, so you need to be able to tell the difference. Are they alive or dead? That's the most common question on everyone's mind. If the sand dollar is white because it's been bleached by the sun after it died, it's okay to take it. It looks bald because it doesn't have any hair. But you may find dark ones, or those with a grayish color to them. They look and feel a little bit fuzzy if you touch them. When you put the sand dollar in your hand upside down, you will be able to see the tube feet and furry cilia, which are hair-like extensions moving around. That's a sure way to tell if it needs to go gently back in the water. Remember, the gray ones are tricky because they can sometimes be dead or alive. Always take a second look. Let's talk about shorebirds. They're everywhere you look. There are local shorebirds that stay all year, but many shorebirds may just be visiting. They fly in after a long journey, and when they arrive, they need to eat. You know how it feels to be hangry, right? I'm sure some of you are wondering about bringing your dog to the beach. Dogs are welcomed at Sanibel beaches as long as they're on a leash that's no longer than 8 feet. Of course, you must clean up after your dog, and if they dig a hole, please fill it in before you leave. Most of all, please don't let your dog chase birds. None of us like to see trash in the water or on the beach. There are all different kinds of litter, as you know. None of it is good for us, sea creatures, or our oceans. Mylar balloons, plastics of all kinds, fishing line, beach toys, forgotten sunglasses, snorkels, old beach chairs, all types of things can be found floating in the water that were left on the beach. I can go on and on. Please, if you see it in the water or on the beach, pick it up and throw it in a trash can. If you brought something with you, bring it back home. It's the right thing to do. Fishing line that has been left behind by fishermen, with and without hooks, poses a different kind of problem. Unfortunately, sometimes the line catches more than fish and can be extremely harmful to wildlife. You will see mind your line containers near your favorite fishing spots. Just toss your unwanted fishing line and any that you may find there. If you see an injured animal tangled in line for any reason, please call CROW, C-R-O-W, on Sanibel. I hope you've enjoyed our shelling etiquette tour through the eyes of the creatures who live here. Don't forget to look up once in a while when you're out on the beach shelling. The views here are always spectacular. It's been so much fun sharing my island with you. This is Wendy the Untitled Chapter, signing out from Sanibel Island, Florida.
Many of us love to collect seashells as we travel around America and around the world. Have you thought about also collecting seashell museums? There are wonderful museums in almost every country. Opportunities to see spectacular shells and learn more about the animals that make them can begin with galleries and special exhibits at the world's largest natural history museums such as London, New York, Paris, or Wellington. In the United States, these 5 museums have the largest malacological collections. We're going to take you on an armchair tour of a few of the larger museums, but also to fun and informative small private collections. Let's start with America's National Shell Museum, located right here on Sanibel Island. The Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum celebrated its 25th anniversary in November 2020. It's the only accredited shell museum in America. Most visitors start in the Great Hall of Shells, where more than 30 exhibits display shells from Sanibel and around the world. There are also touch pools and shell crafting opportunities. The newest addition to the museum is the Gallery of Aquaria. Here you can see the live mollusks that make the shells and learn more about their behavior. You'll also learn how the warming climate and acidification of the oceans threatens them. Now let's head north to the Delaware Museum of Natural History. The exhibits in the Special Hall of Mollusks explain mollusk anatomy, reproduction, and diet. The museum is the sponsor of the DuPont Trophy. This trophy is awarded annually at the Sanibel Shell Show to the outstanding exhibit in the scientific division. The 2020 winner was Ron Bopp for his exhibit on fossil gastropods. Our next 2 museums take us to see collections from individual shell enthusiasts who wanted to share their passion with a larger audience. First, we'll go to the Kenneth E. Stoddard Shell Museum in Boothbay, Maine. Atlas Obscura describes how the museum was founded by Kenneth's son, Lee, to display the shells Kenneth collected during World War II. The shells are housed in a unique covered bridge. If you're in the neighborhood, don't miss it. Let's head south to the pink sand beaches of Bermuda and the personal collection of Jack Lightbourne, who was a shell collector, diver, and conservationist. He helped to establish the Bermuda Underwater Exploration Institute and donated his collection of over 1,200 shells to their Ocean Discovery Center. Jack was a supporter of the Sanibel Shell Show and came from Bermuda every year to participate. Now for something completely different. In the 1600s and 1700s in Europe, no fashionable estate was without a shell room or grotto. The Margate, England grotto was discovered in the 1800s when the landowner's son fell through the open dome into the grotto. Covered with an estimated 4.6 million shells, it is open to the public. Now you know what you can do with all those shells you've been saving. You could spend an entire vacation touring shell-covered spaces throughout Europe. Here are images from the Shell Grotto in the magnificent Neues Palais in Potsdam, Germany. Let's check out Jan Simic's personal passion, the Magical World of Shells Museum in the charming city of Piran, Slovenia, on the Adriatic coast. Jan is frequently at the museum and happy to answer your questions. The exhibits hold more than 4,000 specimens of shells, sea urchins, and sea stars. Heading south to the tip of Africa is Jeffreys Bay, one of the premier shelling spots in the world. Like other personal museums, it began with the collection of Charlotte Kritzinger, who began collecting in 1945. You'll want to spend some serious time at the beach shelling as well. Heading to India, we'll visit 2 personal small museums. In Mysore, Radha Malapa's museum displays her large shell sculptures. Her seashell sculpture of Ganesha is 11 feet tall and is in the Guinness Book of World Records. Her other magnificent sculptures include the Taj Mahal and St. Philomena's Church. Our last personal museum in India is the Indian Seashell Museum in Mahabalipuram. It is the life work of Mr. Raja Mohammed, who has collected over 40,000 specimens, of which 2,000 spectacular ones are on display. We're off to the beautiful Phuket Shell Museum in Thailand. Over 2,000 specimens are on exhibit with labels in both English and Thai. The collection is worldwide and includes many fossils. In Dalian, China, is one of the most iconic and spectacular buildings ever designed for a shell museum. The Dalian Shell Museum looks like a futuristic shell itself. The spacious exhibit hall displays 5,000 current and fossil shells from around the world. If you're not fluent in Chinese, you might benefit from an English-speaking guide. The Jeju Island, South Korea Shell Museum is a shell art lover's dream. All of the more than 7,000 shells are displayed in stunning artistic arrangements. This museum should be on every shell crafter's bucket list. There are more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines with thousands of marine and land snail species. Morell's Seashell Museum on Siquijor was established in 2016 by Mark Reiki, originally from the Oregon Shell Club, and his wife Elgie, who is from Siquijor. Newly crafted cases highlight worldwide shells, and exceptional shelling is right outside the front door. Back in the United States is the Houston Museum of Natural Sciences' totally renovated George W. Strake Hall of Malacology. In the gorgeous gallery, 1,300 shells are on display, including the largest gastropod ever collected, an Australian trumpet shell that measures over 28 inches long. It's time to head back where we started. Perhaps, with luck, each of you can start your own museum, even if it's just one shelf in your bookcase to start. Happy shelling!
fat ones, skinny ones, short ones, tall ones, round ones, square ones, bright ones, white ones, pointy ones, stripes, checks, colors galore, bumpy ones, smooth ones, itsy bitsy ones, and just plain weird ones. Are there any shapes mollusks haven't tried? Why are there so many beautiful shapes and colors? Let's look at some shells and see what they can tell us about the animals that make the shells. Mollusks have been evolving for over 500 million years. They live today in almost every environment. In the oceans, from the beach to the deepest trenches, in trees, in fresh water, even in the desert. They are found on every continent, yes, even in Antarctica. It's estimated that there may be more than 70,000 species, with more being discovered every year. There are 7 classes of mollusks, but let's just look at the types that you are likely to find on Sanibel or in perhaps shell shops. Gastropods, also called snails, are single-shelled mollusks and the most common. It is estimated that today there are over 55,000 different species living in every habitat. Bivalves are the next most common group. They have a shell divided into 2 hinged parts called valves. You can find them in marine and freshwater environments. There are about 10,000 different species, many of which are collected or farmed as a seafood delicacy. Scaphopods, or tusk shells, are small but unique. There are only about 1,000 species worldwide, and only 6 species on Sanibel. If you practice an exceptional Sanibel stoop, you're likely to find tusk shells right at the water's edge at low tide. You're not likely to see any cephalopods on Sanibel, except after a storm when the local pygmy octopus might be thrown up on the beach. You are more likely to see an octopus if you visit the Shell Museum's new aquarium on Sanibel. Why so many shapes? Let's look at 2 common but very different Sanibel shells, the lettered olive and the lace murex. The lettered olive is smooth, bullet-shaped, and shiny. The lace murex is covered with ridges, varices, and ruffles. The lettered olive has a long, narrow opening called an aperture that makes it harder for a predator to reach the animal inside. The lettered olive has only one way to protect itself, and that's to hide. It stays burrowed in the sand most of the day, with just its siphon sticking up into the water to catch the scent of prey. At night, it comes up to feed on the small crustaceans and bivalves. The mantle is the portion of the animal that secretes the materials to create the shell, and in this olive, it can cover the entire shell and keep it shiny. The lettered olive's color is perfect camouflage, but that doesn't protect it from the Genonia that finds olives delicious. Now look at our lace murex. All this sculpture would make it difficult for the animal to burrow into the sand to protect itself, but it has other defenses. The sculpture helps to reinforce the strength of the shell. The ruffle on top of the shell is called a varix. It makes the animal larger, and it could make for an uncomfortable mouthful for a hungry fish. The varix also makes it harder for shell-crushing stone crab to break into the shell. The murex often dines on bivalves, but 2 can play the game. The Florida spiny jewelbox has hollow spines, and the Atlantic thorny oyster sports formidable spines. The ultimate spiny shell is probably the murex pecten, found in Indo-Pacific oceans. Those spines would make most predators think twice about taking a bite, so there's little need to burrow in the sand for protection. Bivalves often burrow too. For example, you often see just the siphons of cockles sticking out of the sand. They filter water for food, and it makes sense to stay hidden. This Atlantic giant cockle is totally hidden except for its siphon. The Florida prickly cockle can burrow as well. It has short scales that point upward, making it harder to pull the shell out of the sand. Some mollusks have an operculum on the top of their foot, often called a trapdoor. They can withdraw into the shell and close the door behind them. The hard operculum of this chestnut turban makes it harder for a predator to crack into the shell. It also keeps the animal moist if it's stranded on the beach for a few hours at low tide. Another approach is to grow so-called teeth. Cowries hide under rocks during the day and feed at night. They don't have an operculum, but their aperture is narrow and the lip is strong with reinforcing teeth. Many land snails have an array of teeth around the aperture that strengthens the shell. Cone snails have strong, heavy shells to protect against predators. They all produce toxins to paralyze the worms, small fish, and other mollusks they eat. A crab can still break into their shell. This alphabet cone shows the marks of breakage, but it survived and continued to grow. Carrier shells protect themselves by attaching carefully selected items. The carrier shell you'll find on Sanibel prefers small bits of rocks and shell. It glues the rocks with its mantle as it expands its shell. The rocks create pointy structures that function like false spines to help defend the animal against predators. The rocks may also camouflage the shell. Mollusks have developed a wide range of reproductive strategies. Many species, such as the lightning whelk and true tulip, have both male and female sexes with internal fertilization. In many species, the female is much larger than the male. They often lay egg cases that contain miniature versions of the adult shell. But other species have a different approach. Slipper shells all begin as males, and as they grow larger, they can change to female. You'll often see a stack of them with the smallest ones, the males, on top of the larger females. Most land snails and some marine species are hermaphrodites. They have both male and female organs. They still favor having sex to mix up their genes, and both snails in the couple will produce eggs. A few species go it alone and self-fertilize, called parthenogenesis. This is helpful where populations are scattered and it's hard to find a mate. Many bivalves have a different problem. They are attached in one place, so they can't go looking for a mate. Their solution is to reproduce by mass spawning. Eggs and sperm are released into the water at the same time by large numbers of adults, usually in the spring when there is more plankton for the larvae to feed on. They rely on the water currents to mix egg and sperm randomly. Some eggs will be fertilized and develop into embryos, then larvae, then ultimately adult mollusks. Many of us love to eat clams and mussels, but what do those mollusks eat? And who eats them? Just about everyone, it seems. Almost everyone has a predator they have to watch out for. It's a dangerous world for the mollusks. Many gastropods are herbivores, including fighting conchs, chestnut turbans, and the keyhole limpets. They mostly eat algae. Bivalves typically filter water, so their primary food is suspended microscopic plants called microalgae. There are lots of carnivores on Sanibel. If you've seen holes in shells, you've probably seen the result of one of these two predators. Both the shark eye and the apple murex have a radula that can rasp a hole in a shell. The radula is like a tongue with thousands of tiny teeth. The shark eye also secretes acid to help bore the hole. This group of Docineas and the Venus were successfully drilled, but it takes a long time to drill a hole. Shark eye snails drill about 1 millimeter a day, and it can take a murex a week to drill through, depending on the thickness of the shell. During that time, the snail is vulnerable to other carnivores and may have to abandon its meal if another predator approaches. It's not unusual to see a shark eye with a hole in it, probably from another shark eye. Cannibalism isn't uncommon. This shark eye was attacked twice but managed to get away both times. The top predator is the horse conch, which can grow to be 2 feet long. It surrounds its prey with a powerful foot and probably secretes substances to relax the animal. Here it is eating a lightning whelk, which is also a carnivore and eats mostly bivalves. Even birds like to eat mollusks. If a cockle is stranded on the beach, a seagull may pick it up, fly high into the air, and drop it to try to break its shell. Sea stars are echinoderms, not mollusks, but they often eat mollusks, especially bivalves. They have a unique approach to dining. They can extend their stomach out through their mouth and engulf their prey. They then insert digestive enzymes to digest their prey. A common sea star in Sanibel is the 9-armed sea star. But some mollusks get back at them. The animals in the family Eulimidae are all parasites on sea stars and sea urchins. They attach themselves firmly and lap up body fluids. These eulimids tend to be smooth and glassy, perhaps to keep their host from noticing their presence. They are also very small. These two examples are less than 3 millimeters long, about 1/10 of an inch. Thankfully, there are snails that think carrion is a delicacy and will quickly dispatch any dead fish or other animal in the water. These Nesarids can smell dinner from a distance and descend on it in great numbers. Bivalves help keep our oceans sparkling clean. They filter water to pick out tiny bits of food. Many of them end up on our dinner plate too. Humans love seafood. Our favorites include oysters, clams, scallops, and fancy French escargot. So which is the predator and which is the prey? Match the predator on the left to the most common prey on the right. Did you make the same matches that we did? The brown eulimid is a parasite on the sea star. The horse conch eats the tulip. The shark eye drills a hole in the Venus clam. And the lightning whelk eats the southern quahog clam. We all love shells because of their beautiful shapes, but also their striking colors and patterns. Shells tend to be more intensely colored in tropical waters than in polar regions. We know a little about how mollusks incorporate pigments into their shells, but we don't really know why. Maybe you'll be the person to figure this out. Mother of pearl, also known as nacre, is the same calcium carbonate material as the rest of the shell, but in a structure that reflects light differently. Abalone and pearl oysters are great examples of shells that are rough on the outside with iridescent mother of pearl inside. Pearls are made of the same material. They're the only gemstone made by an animal. On Sanibel, turn over a pen shell, which is often a plain brown on the outside, and you'll see beautiful mother of pearl on the inside. Most land snails are brown, which may camouflage them, but some are vividly colored. These are Florida liguus, a protected and endangered species that live in trees. While shells are often colorful, we're missing half the story if we don't also look at the colors of the animal. In some species, the live animal is actually more dramatically colored than the shell. The horse conch, for example, is a brilliant orange. While its shell can have attractive muted stripes and sculpture, it is comparatively colorless. Similarly, this lightning whelk has gorgeous markings on the shell, but the live animal is surprisingly pure black. Cowries tend to have beautiful shiny shells. Their mantle, which creates the shell, reaches all the way around the shell and keeps it shiny. In many cases, this mantle is equally spectacular. We don't have a lot of cowrie species near Sanibel, but let's look at some of those found in the tropics. The tiger cowrie is a very popular shell, with its speckled shell that can be found with a wide variety of patterns. The animal has a magnificent mantle. The protuberances on the mantle are called papillae and may help to camouflage the animal and might have a role in respiration. The chocolate-banded cowrie is a beautiful shiny shell found in the Indo-Pacific. The live animal has a stunning black mantle flecked with white and covered with large cylindrical papillae. Again, this mantle may help the animal look more like tufts of algae or other less appetizing sea life. Little egg cowries are not actually in the cowrie family. Commonly, they have a fairly simple white shell. Here are some little egg cowries displaying a variety of brilliantly colored polka dots. These and the little papillae may help to camouflage them against the leather coral polyps that they eat. The red Simnia from the eastern Pacific lives on red Gorgonian sea fans. Its shell is a shade of coral red. The animal also takes its red color and mottled pattern from the soft coral it lives on. This coloration may help it blend into its coral habitat. Coming back to the Caribbean, consider the flamingo tongue. The shell is a plain light orange or white, but the animal is covered with flamboyant geometric dots that mimic the pattern of the Gorgonian soft corals on which they feed. The Gaudy natica is one of Sanibel's prettiest and most coveted shells, but the live animal is equally colorful, with a copper and white pattern all over the mantle. We've just scratched the surface of fascinating details about mollusks on Sanibel and around the world. The extensive diversity of shape, variety of reproductive approaches, assorted diets, and the rainbow of colors of the shells and the animals. Happy shelling!
My given name is Babylonia spirata, but just call me Babby. My story is not unusual, I'm told. I spent most of my life in the warm waters off a small island in the Philippines. One day I was scooped up and very soon became someone's dinner. Afterwards, my shell was sold to a shell dealer, and I was put in a dark box and was shipped off to a strange place called a shell shop on Sanibel Island. I saw a lot of other shells that had come with me from the Philippines. The store probably wanted seashells from the Philippines because shells from warmer waters tend to be more colorful. Also, there are more than 75,000 species of mollusks, and only about 400 are found on Sanibel. So, to fill their bins, they need to buy shells that grow up in other countries. Very soon I heard the sound of waves on the shore again. Many shells had been purchased to grace the beach where a wedding was planned, so all the guests would be sure to find a beautiful shell. I guess that's why people call us wedding shells. Somehow that day, no one found me, and the tide came and took me out into the Gulf water. Then one morning, I was scooped up, and this time to shouts of joy. My finder put me in a bowl with other exotic foreign shells to show to friends. Years later, my owners didn't want us any longer, so to spice up the beach, they dumped all of us back into the water again. While I was happy once again, my presence on the beach was confusing to shellers. I would have been proud to have been donated to the Sanibel Shell Club, who would have sold me at an auction to raise money for research into mollusks. They would know full well that I came from the Indo-Pacific region. For a while, I had a hermit crab living in me, so no one collected me. Live shelling is forbidden on this island, which I think is just wonderful. Once the hermit crab outgrew me, I was collected again and almost got my picture in the paper as a Junonia, but the editor knew better. When they learned I wasn't a Junonia, back in the sea I went. A volunteer shell ambassador from the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum found me next and knew immediately that I didn't come from Sanibel, but from far, far away. If you ever have a question, look around on the beach, and perhaps one of the shell ambassadors will be there to help identify your shells. I'm told another way to know if shells are from Sanibel is to check out the shell guide on the museum's website. Personally, I'd visit the museum and see their display of Sanibel and Captiva shells. The museum also has an app that you can upload to your phone, so you can identify shells while you're still on the beach. So, for that person who thought I was a Junonia, here's what a Junonia looks like, and here it is next to me. A handy waterproof Seashells of Sanibel and Captiva Islands guide is also helpful. You'll notice that I am not on that poster. I just heard about another wedding shell from my country that is often confused with a Junonia as well. It's actually a beautiful Episcopal miter. We hope this helps you to understand that just because you find a shell on the beach doesn't mean it was born and raised there, but enjoy having it.
I'm Ursula Purvis, one of the co-founders of Sanibel Shells.
And I'm Nina Brown. Some say the better half. Don't believe her. It occurred to us we should take our love of shells and Sanibel and painting. Instead of painting rocks for Jacksonville, we should start a group painting shells for Sanibel. Started as a Facebook group in May of 2017 called Sanibel Shells. And in June of that year, we arrived on the island with the first 100 shells to paint and share and hide.
It was so much fun, and the group grew so much faster than we ever expected. I thought maybe 200 members. Nina, do you know how many we have now?
3.5 years in, we have close to 15,000 members. Boggles the mind.
So would you explain exactly what our group does?
It's real simple. You paint a shell and then it gets hidden either on Sanibel or Captiva, and that's the whole story. It spreads a lot of happiness. The painter smiles, painting, the hider smiles, and hopefully the surprised finder smiles when they stumble across it.
We're both retired school teachers, and we love valuable lessons that this teaches to children. Many of them get involved in wanting to paint themselves, and we consider it a way of teaching how to pay it forward.
We did have to find a way to get our shells onto the island in the beginning, so we just made an inquiry on our site, and it got a response from this wonderful woman who owns a sweet shop. We mailed her 100 shells a month, so we knew that many were on island, but as Ursula said, other people joined the bandwagon, and the contributions just grew and grew and grew. Our rules expressly say you can't talk about buying or selling, because after all, the whole idea of our group is to spread a smile. Every collected shell represents one less smile shared with a new person on the island. It's not about seeing the post. It's about spreading the smiles. Another thing we didn't expect was spin-off groups that have happened. First, it was here in Florida. Later, we had Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, places in the Midwest. So, if anybody's out there and wanting to have something fun to do during the pandemic, or even not in a pandemic,
become a shell fairy or a shell pirate.
Paint some shells, spread some smiles.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, I'm Lori Fanning, and I'm with Sanibel Shells on Facebook, and I'm here today with Becky and Audrey, and I'm gonna teach Becky how to paint shells, because anybody can paint shells.
I am Audrey.
Hi there, Becky Mocha. And I'm actually the opposite of anything to do with talent and art in the same sentence.
Take your lightest color, kind of a sand color, and we're going to do that very first bottom layer. All right, the next color is going to be the water, so kind of an aqua color. The next is going to be blue sky, and that needs to be a pretty much perfectly straight line across there. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to fill in like every single speck. We're going to do the stripe of the umbrella. You might have to use the fine point in the corners. Alright, find that little black thin line one, and you can outline the umbrella. I would write Facebook, FB, Sanibel Shells. I put my name, a lot of artists do now, put their name. Write keep or rehide. And I've started putting a motivational saying, and I just say something positive. Well, I started with a Florida fighting conch, painted it green, a light green. I used Posca pen paint for this and literally just draw over my pencil sketch. So I just sketch out the eye, the mouth, the teeth, and the nose. Just take it a little bit at a time and it just comes together.
I found a shell! Oh look, I
found one. It's a flamingo rock.
It's a flamingo guy.
My name is Eric Milbrandt. I am the director of the Marine Laboratory at the Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. Welcome to an Eastern Oyster Reef. Today we are right in front of the SCCF Marine Lab at the end of Tarpon Bay Road, and I wanted to tell you all a little bit about how we are monitoring the health of oyster reefs throughout the region. So you can see behind me is a nice reef standing on. All around there are live oysters, and growing on the reef is a mangrove, a red mangrove, which is a natural progression of Southwest Florida's geomorphology. As the barrier islands formed, there were oyster reefs that also formed, and eventually those oyster reefs are then colonized by mangroves. So often a lot of times the oyster reefs are somewhat hidden underneath mangrove islands. But as you look around the area, especially in the intertidal, you'll see eastern oyster reefs. Eastern oysters are highly threatened worldwide because of our interest in eating them. But these tiny and somewhat delicious bivalves are also a very important part of our ecosystem. They provide structure and habitat for small fish, and they also clean the water. They filter around 50 gallons per oyster per day. So if you think about a reef this size, thousands of animals filtering all day, that's a very good filtration and clearing property that happens at all the reefs. So what I'm going to do today is give you a little bit of insight as to how we monitor the health of oyster reefs. So one of the things that we use, we want to figure out how many oysters there are per square meter, per unit area. So I have a quadrat, and I'm going to harvest the oysters from the quadrat. It was randomly placed, and put them in the tray and measure the shell height of the oysters. So what we've done is we've created a grid on this reef of points, and what we're trying to do is figure out how many live oysters there are per unit area, in this case per square meter. This is not a square meter, this is a quarter square meter. We are subsampling within the meter. What we do is we place the quadrat and we harvest all the live oyster clusters and clumps from the quadrat. A lot of times we'll bring these back to the lab and measure them in the lab under controlled setting, but today we're just going to show you how we measure the height of oysters. So shell height is very similar to measuring shell height in all bivalve. Take the measurement between the umbo and the margin, and then we'll measure the height from the umbo to the margin. So this particular oyster is 46 millimeters. So by measuring all the shell heights within the sample, we then can calculate the number of live oysters per square meter. In addition, we can figure out the size structure. So how many small 1 year, 1.5 year, 2 year, and larger. Oysters don't typically live around here past 3 or 4 years. Occasionally you'll find a really large one. But I did find within the area that we're studying a tulip, a beautiful mollusk that actually will eat oysters. So there's lots of predators out here, and that's how we figure out how healthy the reef is looking at how many live animals there are per square meter. We really want to thank the Shell Club for the years of support of our organization and the many projects we're involved with. And oysters are a really important part of this ecosystem. We want to make sure that we have oysters for the future. So thank you to all the Shell Club volunteers, all the members. Thanks.
Hard clams are a very important part of seagrass ecosystems. In the past, hard clams were very abundant on the coast of southwest Florida, and we know this because of evidence left behind by the Calusa Indians. The Calusa Indians used to consume and dispose of hard clam shells regularly and in large ceremonial events, and this ended up creating small, man-made formed islands, such as Mount Key and Estero Bay. When archaeologists dug the hard clams up from these islands, they discovered that these hard clams were dated back to 300 to 500 AD. So we know that hard clams have been established in this area for a very long time. In the 20th century, one of the world's largest hard clams fisheries was actually in 10,000 Islands here in southwest Florida. There was a 40-mile long, 5-mile wide swath of hard clams that existed in thriving seagrass meadows. However, by the mid-20th century, the hard clam fishery had collapsed due to overharvesting and changes in water quality. Hard clams can be found in seagrass ecosystems as large, white, round shells with prominent ridges. Hard clams have similar ecosystem roles as oysters in that they both filter phytoplankton from the water. Hard clams can help improve water quality by filtering out plankton from the water and decreasing competition for sunlight and nutrients with seagrass. They are also a really important part of the ecosystem because they take energy from the phytoplankton and transfer it up the food chain to higher trophic levels. There are two species of hard clams in southwest Florida. There's the northern hard clam, Mercenaria mercenaria, and the southern hard clam, Mercenaria campechiensis. Northern hard clam is the preferred species for aquaculture because it has a longer shelf life, so it's easier to sell to the marketplace. However, the southern hard clam is the native species, and its diversity here has been dwindling, especially with an increase in northern hard clam genetics throughout the area due to aquaculture. With our hard clam project, we hope to increase the number of southern hard clam species in this area and revitalize their population. And also, we hope to understand the effects that hard clam restoration has on the environment, such as does it change water quality and phytoplankton community structure. Since hard clam restoration hasn't been done yet in this area, our project is going to test to see how hard clam restoration is going to work using a small pilot study. This will help us determine what exactly is needed in order to scale up to larger ecosystem restoration efforts. Our study area is 900 meters squared, and we'll be putting 12,000 hard clams in this area, and we'll be monitoring them over the period of a year to see how they respond in terms of growth, survival, reproduction, and we'll also be looking at different parts of water quality such as nutrients and responses of the phytoplankton community. Since hard clams are filter feeders, we might expect to see some sort of change, like a decrease in the abundance of phytoplankton over the area where restoration was completed. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to the Shell Club for supporting this project and funding all research related to bivalves and gastropods and shells. I think what you guys are doing is really great, and I'm very excited to get started on this project. Thank you.
to learn about a group of animals called echinoderms. In this group we have sea stars, sand dollars, sea urchins, and sea cucumbers. What they all have in common is actually given away by the name. So if you break that down, echino means spiny or bumpy, and derm means skinned. So these are spiny or bumpy skinned creatures. Perhaps the most obvious when you think about it is a sea urchin. It's got those nice long spines that stick out. But sea stars and sea cucumbers tend to be bumpier. Another thing these creatures have in common is what we call pentaradial symmetry. So they all have some form of this. And most obvious is our friends, the sea stars. So penta meaning 5. So they have 5 body parts that radiate out from a central disc. So this sea star here has 5 arms. Sometimes they have more than that, but it's usually a multiple of 5. So 5, 10, 15, or 20, or more. Another thing these creatures have in common is an endoskeleton covered by a layer of skin or an epidermis. And this skeleton is made up of ossicles. So these are bony plates that fuse together by some connective tissue. And some of them, like sea cucumbers, they can control the rigidity of that skeleton, which is pretty cool. So they can make themselves ooey gooey or really hard like a rock. Lastly, these creatures have a water vascular system. So instead of blood pumping through their body, they pump salt water through. They have a pore called a madrepore, and that pulls salt water in or out to maintain the pressure inside of their bodies and also help them with movement. So they have podia or tube feet that come out and can grab and hold on to surfaces, and that helps these creatures move. Some of them can move up and down the sides of rocks, and so they use that water vascular system to help with pressure and locomotion. So you can find sand dollars in sandy bottom habitats, and they usually burrow themselves just beneath the surface of the sand, and they'll use their spines to do that. So they move along in the sand to find food to eat. So these creatures are eating detritus, which is broken down organic matter. So you can think of it when a plant or an animal dies, that breaks down into small pieces that get mixed up in the sand or the sediment, and our sand dollars move along and they eat that out of the sand. So this is a sand dollar that we just collected out in the Gulf of Mexico. On the top, perhaps it's the most obvious how you can see it's 5 parts. So it almost looks like petals coming off of a flower. These are what we call ambulacra. They're just the 5 parts of the body of the sand dollar. And around them, little tube feet come out and help with respiration. And so they're pretty hard to see with just your eyes. In the middle here is what we call the madrepore. This helps the sand dollar maintain pressure in its water vascular system, so it can pull in salt water through that. And then these holes are called luneals. And the function of those is kind of debated among scientists. Researchers think it helps prevent the sand dollar from getting lifted by a current. So let's say some water comes and pushes against the sand dollar, it can pass through it instead of flipping it over or tossing it around. And then they also think they may help with feeding as well. Our sand dollar is covered in tiny little spines all around the edge of its test as well. Now we're looking at the bottom of the sand dollar, or the oral side, and that's because their mouth is located underneath and it's right in the center. And then you can see lots of spines all moving around all over the bottom of the sand dollar. Here we have a sand dollar test, or their skeleton. So sand dollars and sea urchins and sea biscuits are a little bit different because they have this nice hard skeleton, this test that they make. And then if we flip it over, you can see there are these sections here, 5 of them, going towards the center, towards the sand dollar's mouth. And these are their food grooves. So using both spines and their podia, or their tube feet, they can move particles of food that they'd like to eat towards the center. You can think of it like a conveyor belt, helping them move food towards their mouth.
So a prized find for beachgoers is a sand dollar test or skeleton. And sometimes people may not know how to tell the difference and tell whether one is alive or not. So right now, probably the most obvious is the color. A live sand dollar is gray, sometimes greenish or purplish even, and their test is white. The skin and spines are gone, and it usually gets bleached by the sun too if it's washed up onto the beach. So color, spines are another indication that this creature is still living. In fact, if you look closely, you can see them moving as well. And another thing that happens is that your fingers might turn slightly yellow when you're holding a live sand dollar. These creatures can ink, so when they are nervous or scared, sand dollars will ink, and ours ink yellow. So when we find a sand dollar that's alive, it's important that we put it right back down into the water and lay it down gently on the sand. These creatures need to be in the water to breathe and feed and eat, so we can't ever take them out. If we do remove them from the sea, they will eventually die. So never take a sand dollar if it's living.
This is the way I clean and preserve sand dollars, spiny urchins, and sea stars. We'll talk about sand dollars and spiny urchins first. If the sand dollar you find has a velvety skin, don't take it. It's alive. Dead sand dollars are white. When you find an urchin, watch for even the slightest movement of their spines. If you see any movement at all, it means they're alive. Let's start with sand dollars. The first step is to get as much sand out of the sand dollar as possible. You can buy sand dollar hardener at shell shops, but basically it's the same as mixing Elmer's glue and water half and half. When your third coat is dry, you will have a sand dollar that is significantly stronger, but it's still breakable. Let's move on to spiny urchins. The urchin's mouth is on the bottom side of the shell. You have to remove the chewing mechanism in order to clean the inside of the shell. If your urchin isn't too large, you can make it really strong by filling it with hot glue. It took over 2 sticks to fill this one. If they're moving at all, it's alive and should be left in the tide pool. Probably the easiest way to cure a sea star is to put it out in the sun where it can dry out naturally. Do not use the following procedure if your sea star stinks. Use it only if it's recently dyed. We're going to use cinnamon or nutmeg or cloves mixed in with some water. This will help mask the smell of the sea star in the microwave. We'll put the cinnamon and the water in, and then we'll put the sea star in. Let's set the microwave for 10 seconds. When the time is up, you'll want to check its condition. Never do more than 10 seconds at a time. When the sea star is dehydrated or hard, some people like to add a coat of a clear spray. This is strictly a personal preference. Sometimes there just aren't many shells on the beach, at least shells that you'd want to take home for your collection. All you see are common beach shells and footprints, lots and lots of footprints. That's when my friend Linda and I came up with an idea. We decided to see how many different species of shells we could find within 1 square yard of beach during a 30-minute period. We staked out our perimeter and began our hunt. As you can see, the vast majority of the shells were bivalves, primarily crossbar Venus and small arc shells. We decided that using a colander to sift out some of the sand might speed things up. Sometimes it was productive, other times not so much. Digging down produced more sand than shells, but we weren't discouraged because all of a sudden a tiny lettered olive appeared. Encouraged, we went back to do some more sifting. This time we found a small piece of a variable worm shell and an immature Florida fighting conch. Another shake or two of the colander and a very small slipper shell and 1 valve of a small leafy jewel box were added to our collection. The find of the morning was a small horse conch, the Florida state shell. This juvenile might have grown to be almost 24 inches in length if it had not met its demise. That's the length of the world record horse conch on display at the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum, and seen here being held by interim director and curator Dr. Jose Leal. It is 606 millimeters, or about 23.8 inches long. The purpose of our experiment was to see how many different species we could find on the beach when it didn't look like there was any variety at all. During our 30-minute quest, we found 25 species in a 36-inch by 36-inch section.
In March of 2020, after a $6 million renovation, the Bailey Matthews National Shell Museum reopened with 11 aquarium tanks, including 2 touch pools for visitors to explore. What does it take to keep all these animals healthy and happy? We're going on a tour behind the tanks with the 2 scientists who care for these mollusks, fish, and other creatures, Rebecca Mensch, Senior Biologist and Registrar, and Carly Holst, Senior Aquarist. Both hold degrees in marine biology and specialized training in maintaining live mollusks. Don't be surprised by the noise. There's extensive specialized equipment behind the tanks.
These are our quarantine systems. So when our animals come into the museum, they go through a quarantine process. With invertebrate animals, usually the quarantine length is 45 days. So this is a standalone system. Each one of these can be isolated, or we can use this as one whole system. So this is another one of our quarantine systems. This one is specifically designed for corals and giant clams. It's much shallower, and it has special coral grow lights on them. This system is specifically designed for animals that need photosynthesis. So without this really intense grow light, the algae that's in their bodies isn't going to be able to do photosynthesis, which means that the animals, the corals that are hosting those algae, called zooxanthellae, are not going to be able to feed. So they'll basically end up starving to death without these special lights in the shallow water. All of our animals have different dietary needs, and we have all sorts of different food to make sure we're taking care of our animals properly. So some of our food is for herbivores. These are sheets of seaweed. It's called nori. This is the same thing that you wrap sushi in. A lot of our conchs like to eat this. Also for herbivores, we have some types of pellets. So these are pellets also made out of algae and then pressed into these smaller pellets. So some of our cowries and some of our conchs eat this. We use this for our different fish. So all of like our reef fish, all of our smaller, nice, pretty, colorful ones, they all eat different types of pellets. And then we have filter feeders. So all of our bivalves are filter feeders, and they eat phytoplankton that's suspended in the water. What we do is we add it in. So we turn off the system for about a half hour and add in some of this super concentrated phytoplankton that the animals will just filter out of the water just like they would in their natural habitat. And then we have some animals that are a little more particular about their food. So these are frozen clams. So these are human-grade seafood. They've gone through all the FDA inspections, so we know they're super clean and healthy. Some of our local gastropods, like the lightning whelk, like to eat bivalves. The shrimp is for a couple of different animals. Some of our local animals do scavenge on this. So say our banded tulip, our scrawled cowfish. They like to eat a lot of different meaty food. And these are also food for our octopus. They're all carnivores. So they eat things like clams and shrimp and different types of fish and crab. So a lot of the fancy seafood that we like to go out and eat, our octopuses like that as well.
So this is our giant Pacific octopus habitat, and you'll notice here how we have this lovely astroturf. Octopuses are the masters of disguise and of escaping. Their suckers actually cannot suction onto the astroturf. So we have astroturf lining this entire exhibit. Here we have about a 1,000-gallon system. And when we were building the aquarium, we actually had to put in this exhibit before we could build walls down here. Back here we have our filtration system for the giant Pacific octopus. The octopus comes from a colder climate, so we have a very large heat exchanger on there to keep our temperature between 50 and 55 degrees. We also have a larger sump. That is because the octopus does have the ability to ink if it were to get very overwhelmed. So we want to make sure that we have the larger sump and the larger filtration so the ink would come out pretty quickly. One of my favorite facts about the giant Pacific octopus is that a fully grown male can lift 30 pounds with one sucker. And they have over 1,000 suckers between all 8 arms. One of the reasons that we know that octopuses and cephalopods in general are so intelligent is due to their ability to solve problems, puzzles, and different mazes. So enrichment is anything that stimulates or encourages those natural foraging and curious behaviors that the octopus might have. Some types of enrichment are with these various puzzles and dog toys. We give them shake toys, and we'll also put food inside there. They get enrichment daily, and it keeps them happy and healthy. The thing that we do is we target train our octopus. We put this in the water, and that's the octopus's cue. It is time to interact with us. And so the octopus will simply touch this with one of his arms, and then we will reward him with either food or a toy. And this is really, really helpful because we can do exams with our vet, and it makes it less stressful for him and also less stressful for us. When we first got the octopus, we learned that he didn't like men, and he also did not particularly care for baseball hats. During an interaction, the man that was up here, he usually had a hat on, and the octopus went into a very defensive pose and would not go near us during the entire thing. They are so intelligent that they can actually tell the difference between myself and everyone else. They taste our skin, and it tastes different to them.
So female octopuses tend to like women better because they can taste our estrogen, and male octopuses tend to like men better because they can taste the testosterone. So it's not just something as simple as, oh, did we have lotion on or something? They can actually taste all of the chemicals that are going on in our body that we can't even smell on each other.
We are very fortunate to have a certified aquatic vet. She is Dr. Heather Barron, and she's actually from Crow Clinic on the island. So she does come over twice a month, and she'll do full physicals on everybody. Not much is known as far as medicine for mollusks. So we're on the forefront here. We are hoping to do more research as far as that so we can make an impact in the public aquarium community. One of the really cool things other things that we've done is ultrasounds with the octopus.
Another thing that we have in the lab is our whole water filtration system. So all of the animals that we have in are saltwater animals. So all of our systems are self-contained. So that means that each system can have its own parameters. We can tweak temperatures, salinity levels, all those different things can be specific for each exhibit. So first, when it comes in, it goes through what's called mechanical filtration, which is kind of like a sieve. And we use, these are called filter socks. And then after that, this chamber, which has UV light in it, it's going to be able to kill off any bacteria or viruses that might be growing in the water. Then it goes through another chamber which has a ton of surface area for good bacteria to be growing in. So this good bacteria is able to convert ammonia from the waste from the animals into some less toxic forms of nitrogenous waste. And then into what's called a protein skimmer. It swirls the water all around and creates bubbles, and any lipids are going to attach to those bubbles, and then they come up and they burst up here.
So water quality is one of the most important parts of our job because that is essentially their total environment. We have to test for their pH, the salinity, and the ammonia, nitrites, nitrates, calcium, and phosphates. So we want to look at the water as a whole just to make sure that the animals are getting the proper water quality and they're not having large fluctuations in their water.
Our mollusks live for a wide variety of ages. Many of the mollusks around the world, there's no research about how long they live. So for a lot of our animals, especially our local stuff, when we get them at adult sizes, and there really just isn't any research of how long does that mean they have left. So some of the species, there's a lot known. The giant Pacific octopus, they're considered having a super long life as far as octopus go, which is 3 to 5 years. but we're not getting them at babies. We're getting them a little further along when they're larger. So we don't know the exact hatch date for them, and we have to estimate. So with octopuses, the smaller octopuses, we usually estimate around 6 months tends to be the size that you tend to get them at. With giant Pacific octopuses, somewhere in the year-ish range. So then you can kind of estimate how much longer you expect to have that animal. We've got some California sea hares that are a really big hit in our cold water touch pool. Those only have a lifespan of a little over a year, and we get them at adult sizes. So those are ones that also we expect to have for a shorter amount of time. But some of our local ones like horse conchs and lightning whelks that have a longer lifespan, we have actually a big lightning whelk that we've had for 4 years. That's actually some of our behind the scenes research that we're doing, is trying to figure out lifespans of mollusks. So certain species breed very easily in captivity, and then certain species it's very, very difficult. So for instance, octopuses, they tend to be very aggressive after mating. So mating in captivity is not something usually attempted. Whereas our banded tulips, basically we can't stop them from mating. If you've got banded tulips in the system together, they're gonna mate, and we have viable eggs and viable offspring that come out consistently throughout the years. Then we have yet other ones that are still ongoing research. Hopefully the next step for the Junonia research would be to get a large female Junonia and see if we can have any breeding happening with our 2 large males that we have right now. So there's a lot of factors that go into deciding which animals can go in which systems together. Usually the term is called tank mate. So the first thing you have to take into consideration is the actual habitat. What is the temperature? Is it sandy or rocky? What's the flow like? What's the lighting like? So that's the first thing. Of those things all have to be similar for all of the animals. And then the next big thing is feeding. Basically, will they pick on each other? Will they try to eat each other? Is there any type of aggression that goes into each other? So there's kind of these 2 big factors of how the animals actually interact with each other, and then the environmental factors that have to be considered. So we get our animals from a variety of different areas. With our local animals, we have a special activities license through the state that allows us to go out and hand collect a certain amount of animals for education and research. So the animals that are in our warm water touch pool, those are ones that we've gone out and hand collected. Some of our animals are aquacultured, which means born and raised in captivity. So like our giant clams, all of our corals, none of those are taken from the wild. The California sea hares, those are actually from a research center at the University of Miami. Those animals are usually sold for biomedical research. We are just kind of the oddballs of their purchasers who actually are keeping them to keep them alive. And then we also have animals that are coming from very specific vendors that only supply to aquaria. We do a lot of due diligence to make sure that the places that we're getting them from are all regulated and certified and have all of their licenses and everything.
One of my favorite things is seeing the kids light up about an octopus. A lot of kids, especially little girls, are usually grossed out by the slimy things. So if I can convince a little kid that a mollusk is cooler than a dolphin, game over. Like, that is the best day. And I've done it 3 times since we've been open, and it was awesome.
So the biggest kind of aha moment that guests have is generally finding out that seashells are parts of animals. About 95% of our guests can't really fully explain what a shell is. We ask them, what is a shell, or where does a shell come from? They kind of say, oh, the ocean, or oh, it's a rock, or I never thought about it. So when they actually have that moment of going, oh, it's an animal, that is usually the biggest aha moment for guests, and kind of the coolest thing to see, because now you've suddenly just completely changed the way they look at the ocean, the way that they look at shelling, the way they look at all of the rest of the exhibits. And a lot of times this happens in a couple of different places, but the big place is at the touch pool, where they have a chance to have that one-on-one interaction with an educator, and that educator can point these things out to them. But they also get a chance to touch and feel, and for many people that physical interaction is where it finally cements, and they can see it moving, and they can see it looking back at them. And it finally cements to them of like, oh, it's an animal, and it has eyes, and it can see me. So that's usually the big aha moment for most of our guests.
My name is Karen Silverstein, and I'm the president of the Sanibel Captiva Shell Club. I want to thank you for participating in our virtual shell show and hoped that you learned some new information about malacology and conchology. I want to thank our very generous sponsors and the committee members that made this presentation possible. Particularly, I would like to thank Connie Jump, Claire Beckman, and Phyllis Sharp, who have spent hours every day for months working on the presentations that you've seen. If you missed any of the videos or you would like to see them again, they should be on our website, sanibelshellclub.com, beginning this Monday. And we hope that you will join us next year for an in-person shell show, which will occur the first Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of March. We hope that you stay safe and well, and look forward to seeing you next year.
Hi, Claire Beckman here one last time as your cephalopoda ceremonies for the 2021 virtual Sanibel Shell Show. Thank you for being with us. We hope you enjoyed it. And more importantly than anything, a big shout out to Mary Burton and Joyce Mathis, who have chaired the shows for many years and will be back chairing the show next year at the Sanibel Community House. We hope we see you all then. And until then, here's to all things mollusks. Bye now.